Hello everyone. This is the second in what will be a 5-part video series designed to support a study of my book, The One Open Door. So last time I told you about my beginnings in spiritual practice and something about the struggles and the adventures that led to my decision at the age of 29 to enter a Zen Buddhist monastery in California. And I talked with you about suffering and conditioned mind, and also about the importance of the skill of being able to direct our attention. And I hope you had a good practice week with that. I hope you were able to practice watching your attention go all over the place and bringing it back to the moment over and over and over again. It truly is the foundation of spiritual practice, at least in the way that I practice it. So this week I'm going to continue the story, and I have a number of things I want to talk with you about. Okay? And the first one is I want to talk with you about the difference between wants and needs. Now, of course, that's a very common distinction. I'm sure that's something you're familiar with. But I want to talk with you about it in a very particular way. So when I look back on the young man who I was before I entered the monastery, it's pretty clear to me that I had absolutely no idea what I needed. I had tons of ideas about what I wanted, but nothing really about what I really needed. And I actually assumed that the two were the same. I didn't know there was a difference. I assumed that what I wanted was what I needed, but that is not the case at all. And the reality is that what we want, for most people, this is not absolutely the case, because it's possible to want from more than one place. But for someone at any rate who's in conditioned mind, the wanting is coming from ego. So you may remember from last time that I talked about this thing that is sort of a technical word in Buddhism, the word suffering, and that what suffering is believing in the illusion of a self that is separate from life. And that self, so we have like a fictional self that we assume is who we really are. And when we identify with that self, we suffer. And while we're identified with that self, the reason we suffer is because we're separate from, just life unfolding. We're separate from God, if you like to use that word. And we're separate from, just the infinite abundance that exists in this moment, because we're living in this illusion where none of that is happening. And so because we're a separate self, and because we're separate from what we truly want, what we truly need, we want all kinds of things. Do you know how it is? There's this, just when you're identified in conditioned mind, there's this empty place inside. There's kind of like an ache that's there that comes from being disconnected from our authentic nature, and from the authentic nature of what just is this incredibly beautiful reality that we live inside of. And when we are in ego, a separate self, we want to gather things together, things and experiences together, to try to fill that empty space. And, if you look at the lives of most people, that's what most people are doing. And that's certainly what I was doing before I went to the monastery, trying to get stuff and trying to get experiences to somehow, fill up the space so I would feel fulfilled and satisfied. But of course it didn't work, because the problem wasn't that I was lacking stuff or lacking experiences. The problem was that I was disconnected from life, but I just didn't know that was the case. And so what I found, over time, is that what I truly need is actually really, really simple. And this is what I think we all need. So see what you think. What I truly need is my own loving attention. That's it. Now, of course, I have bodily needs and stuff. I need food and water and shelter and that kind of thing. But what I truly need in my heart and for my spirit is my own loving attention. And that was the thing that I didn't have, because my attention was in this illusion of a separate self. And my attention a lot of the time was on what I wanted, what I thought I wanted. And when it wasn't on that, it was on all the drama and all the chaos and everything that was going on because of the world that I lived in, being in conditioned mind. But what I truly want and what I truly need is my own loving attention. And a big part of what practice is, as we talked about last time, and as I learned as I began my monastic training, was to learn how to give my own attention to myself, to be aware of this thing that I call attention and be able to give it to myself. Okay? So I set off to do that. And on March the 25th, I remember the day very well, was up to this point, probably the most significant day in my life. And probably will be, we'll see, probably will be the most significant day in my life until I die. It was the day I left the life that I was brought up to lead, and I entered a Zen Buddhist monastery. So on March the 25th, I got on an airplane in North Carolina, and I was actually in pretty good shape as far as I recall. Um, and but over the course of the travels across the country to California, I began to doubt because suddenly I realized it's like, well, wait a second, I actually don't know what I'm getting myself into. I've only met this woman once who's going to be my teacher and who's going to be in charge of my life essentially. I didn't know to what extent she would be in charge of my life, but I had a sense that she was going to be the boss. And can I really trust her? What she's all about? What is she, some kind of crackpot, or something? And so I went from being relatively okay to scared to being terrified. And by the time that I ended up outside of baggage claim at the other end of my journey, I was just in a state. And then, it was really ironic because, here comes the monk to pick me up at the airport, this little beater of an old red car, and she's wearing jeans and a T-shirt. Not at all what I was expecting. I was expecting robes and, something Buddhist looking. She's just in jeans and a T-shirt. She was wearing beads, though. I don't have my beads on right now, but she was wearing these interesting beads that kind of set her off from everybody else. We got in this little red car, and we drove a couple hours up into the middle of nowhere where the monastery was. And I'll never forget coming down on the property for the first time. It was dark, and so it's a little windy gravel road coming down onto the monastery property. We parked in what I later learned to call the upper parking lot, pitch black. So it was me and her, the monk, and my little dog Rhea, who would come along on to my monastic career with me. We got out of the car, and we got out some flashlights because it was pitch dark, and we walked down from the parking lot down into the main monastery compound. And the compound essentially consisted of two big buildings. There was a building on the left that was the dining hall, very beautiful building with a vaulted ceiling inside, a red tile roof, just gorgeous building. And then the meditation hall on the right. And in between was an archway and sort of a space, and so you could walk in between the two. And we walked in between the two, and as we walked in between, I kind of looked over to the right because there was a light there. It was the only light that I could see anywhere. There weren't even any distant lights from houses or anything. It was pitch black. And so I looked over, and there's a light. And inside this room that I learned later was the meditation hall, what I saw really kind of took my breath away because there were a handful of people, there were probably 8, sitting in the room in a very formal manner with one person sitting at the front of the room. And I realized that they're receiving the teachings. They're having a group where they're talking about their struggles and what they're seeing in practice and what they're working on and stuff. And it just blew my mind that I had come all this way and I had given up this life that I had before to be one of them. And I realized suddenly in that moment, I'm a monk now. And it was too late to join that group that evening, but the next time that would happened 2 times a week. The next time that would happen, I was going to be one of their number. So from there, we went down this little windy path with our flashlights, and the monk who was guiding me took me to this little building. It was we called it a hermitage. It was essentially a plywood shack, right? It had no insulation, no interior walls, nothing. All it had was some mismatched pieces of carpet, a bed, which was basically just a plywood platform with a piece of foam on it, a wood-burning stove, and a desk and a chair, and a light bulb, and it had its own tiny little power system and a solar panel outside. That was all that was there. The monk left me there. She told me what time to be back up the main buildings in the morning. And I got out my stuff, and I got out my sleeping bag, and crawled into my sleeping bag with Rhea, the little dog, because she was my security blanket essentially. And we went to sleep. And the next morning we woke up as monks, and we began our life, the new life that we had. And so the next morning I went up, and after going to my first meditation on the property, I walked into the dining room, and I saw a notice on the board, and it was called the One Rule. That's what was written at the top. It's called the One Rule. So, and here's what I read. So we have many guidelines, it said, but we have one rule. And the one rule is that we will use everything in our experience to see how we cause ourselves to suffer so we can drop that and end suffering. We will use everything in our experience to see how we cause ourselves to suffer so we can drop that to end suffering. And that, I didn't really understand it at the time, but that was essentially the guiding principle for monastic training. And so let me make a little distinction for you to help hope you kind of understand how that's so. So to me, a very important and useful distinction in life and in practice is the one between content and process. Content is just the stuff of life. It's the situations, it's different things that are going on in life. The process is what's going on behind the scenes with that content. So for example, that morning, the content was, I was trying to figure out how to fit into this place, how things work, what are the rules, where do I put my shoes, where do I put my stuff, all that kind of stuff. That was all the content. Underneath that, there were several processes going on for me. So for example, one process was I was trying to look cool, right? I was trying to pretend like, oh, I got my stuff together. I already know kind of what this is all about. Of course, I didn't at all. So I was kind of pretending, in other words. So that was one process. Another process is I was scared. So I was doing a process of fear. And stuff like that. There were, so there's stuff going on behind the scenes, and I actually wasn't even really aware that stuff was going on because my attention was on the content. And the reason this distinction is so important is because when a person is in conditioned mind, their attention is exclusively on the content of life. It's on the stuff, and they're trying to rearrange the circumstances of their life so that they can feel the way they want to feel. But that's not a good idea. A life that's devoted to content is going to end in misery because we're not happy on the level of content. We might feel happy briefly when we get what we want, get the new car or the new boyfriend or girlfriend or something. You're going to feel good for a little while, right? It's like, whoo, I got something I want. But it doesn't take care of the ache and that empty place inside. The way that we're made to be truly happy people is to actually find out what truly fills that empty place, which, as I said, is our own loving attention. Okay? So we have to learn how to have a process-oriented orientation to life rather than a content orientation to life. And that's basically what the rule is, the one rule. The one rule says we're gonna be aware of the content. And at the monastery, there's a lot of content. I'm doing a work project. I'm eating some food. I'm going around, stuff going on with my body. It's the weather. There's all kinds of content going on. But the one rule said, I'm not going to be paying attention to the content primarily. I'm going to be aware of it, but I'm going to be primarily paying attention to the process that's underneath that. Okay? And that was how I lived my life. And, I still do. I mean, that is my orientation to life is I want to be aware of process and I want to live on a level of process because if I live on a level of process, that gives me the power to let go of conditioned mind and all the suffering that happens in conditioned mind. And it allows me to make a free choice for peace, love, belonging, connection, all the things that we truly want in ourselves that exist here in the moment. Okay? All right, cool. So one more thing I want to tell you about, and that's what, in the book I call it the voices. And so that's one way of talking about it. You could talk about it just as thoughts. You could talk about it as the conversation with conditioned mind. But the thing that I'm pointing at there is, and see if this is your experience, is we're going through life, of someone who's in conditioned mind is going through life with a nearly incessant stream of thoughts in their mind. And that stream of thought is what I call the voices of conditioned mind. Okay? So consider this for a moment, that we're taught to believe, and I certainly believed this until I went to the monastery and learned differently, and I think most people believe this, that what is going on in our minds is me thinking. Those are my thoughts. And because those are my thoughts, they must be real and true. That is not the way it is from this point of view. Almost all the time, for almost all people, I would say, what's going on in their mind is not them thinking, not their authentic selves thinking. It's conditioned mind talking to them. Okay? So consider that for a moment. That's a very different reality. If it's just me thinking, then I'm just going to do whatever my thoughts tell me to do. But if it's conditioned mind talking to me, that's a really different thing, because conditioned mind is not interested in my well-being. It's not interested in me having a good, deep, fulfilling, happy, peaceful, connected life. Conditioned mind is always directed towards suffering because that's what it does. And so if I don't know, if I'm not aware that the stuff that's going on in my mind is conditioned mind talking to me, then I'm just going to do what it says, and my life is going to end up in misery. So a very, very, very important distinction. Okay? And so there I was at the monastery, and I had no idea really that was going on, but I learned to pay attention to that because, that's we talked about that a lot. And I learned to go from, being surrounded basically inside my thoughts, believing in their reality and living in the reality they created, which was various forms of suffering, to moving it in my awareness over here to where I could see it. And I learned to be aware of my thoughts, and I learned to be aware that that's actually conditioned mind operating, and I don't need to do what it's telling me to do, and I actually need to question everything that's happening there and all the assumptions that are being made. Okay? And so we'll talk more about that as we go through this video series, but I just want to have that in your mind because that's part of the homework that I want to give you for the next week. Okay, very good. So I have two things I want you to discuss in your group today. And the first thing is really more of an exercise than a question for discussion. So it'd be handy if you have a paper and a pen, so you can write some things out in preparation for your discussion. Okay. So here's the assignment for you. So pick something in your life where there's some kind of challenge or difficulty, some place where you're suffering. And I want you on one side of your paper write down what's the content, and another what's the process. Okay, so for example, let's say I'm in a work situation and there's been a project that I was asked to do and it didn't go well. So the content is what actually happened in the process. Well, this went wrong, that went wrong, this happened, that happened. That's the content. On the process level, for me, I would be beating myself up for that, judging myself. I would be, trying to make promises to myself that it's going to be different in the future, stuff like that. That's what's happening on the process level. Okay, so see if you can see the difference between the two. All right, and so after you write those out, then have a conversation about that. If you want to pause the video to have that, feel free if that seems right. And then the second is just a question for discussion. To consider what for you is the difference between a want and a need. And particularly, what does conditioned mind want? What does your ego want? And what do you truly need? Like truly need to be a peaceful, happy, grounded, connected person in this life. Okay? All right, very good. And now I'm going to give you a practice for the week. You may want to pause the video at this point so you can put the practice for the week at the end, up to you. But here's the practice for the week. So the practice for the week is to go through your life and follow the one rule. So see if you can go through your life and have a process-oriented focus and just see what's going on behind the scenes. What can you be aware of about how you do life and what conditioned mind is up to? Stuff like that. What is the process of suffering that goes on, and also what is the processes that go on to lead to beyond suffering, the experience of life beyond suffering. Just see what you see about that. Okay? And as a part of that, in particular, pay attention to the voices of conditioned mind. Notice the thoughts that are happening. Notice the conversation that's happening in conditioned mind, and see if you can get a little bit of distance from it and be observant of it rather than just having it here, believing it. Okay? Excellent. Very good. I hope you have a fabulous week, and I hope you have a good practice week with that and a good discussion, and I will talk with you next week. Thank you very much.